My name is June Marsh. I'm 39, and I find money that's trying to disappear for a living. I sit in a glass office at a regional bank in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I read patterns. A transfer that's a little too round, a loan repayment to a brother who never made a loan. Money that walks out the front door wearing a respectable coat. I'm good at it. I'm so good at it that the morning my husband served me divorce papers, I almost laughed because he'd done every single thing I catch strangers doing for a living, and he'd done it under my own roof, and he was so sure I'd never look. 6 weeks later, I set a single spreadsheet on a polished conference table, and his lawyer stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. His mother went the color of the wall, and my husband, who had spent 20 years telling me I wasn't good with money, finally understood exactly who he'd married. Welcome back to Peaceful Drama Stories, where ordinary women stop apologizing and start keeping receipts, and the truth gets to speak at a normal volume for once. If a calm voice and an earned reckoning are your thing, drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe and stay with me to the end, because the part everyone needs to hear comes near the close. I should tell you who I am, because it's the whole story. I follow money the way some people follow weather. It's not a talent, it's a habit. I built one disappointment at a time. My father drove a delivery route, and my mother cleaned offices at night. And the thing that broke our house wasn't a fight. It was a man at our kitchen table in a cheap tie explaining to my parents that the loan they'd signed for a relative, the one nobody read, had come due. I was 11. I watched my mother's hands while the man talked. They were folded so tight her knuckles went white, and she kept saying, "But we were told it was a formality." I decided that night, in the way children decide enormous things over small ones, that I would never in my life sign a paper I hadn't read, and I would never let anyone make me feel stupid for reading it. I kept that promise everywhere except the one place it mattered most. My own marriage. Funny how that works. You can be a fortress at the office and a screen door at home. I met Greg Marsh when I was 25. He was charming in the way that photographs well, the kind of man who remembers the bartender's name and makes you feel chosen in a crowded room. He sold commercial HVAC systems and then started his own company installing them, and he was good at it. I'll give him that. What he was best at, though, was making other people feel like the math was being handled. "Don't worry about it," he'd say, and pat the air, and you'd believe him, because believing him was easier than the alternative. We married fast. I told myself his confidence balanced my carefulness. I told myself a lot of things. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I let him handle the money. Me, the woman who traces hidden accounts for a bank. When the business grew, he said it was cleaner to keep things in the company. And I, who knew better than almost anyone alive, said okay, because saying okay was a muscle I'd overdeveloped, and because somewhere in those years, I'd let him talk me into the idea that my caution was an anxiety problem and his confidence was a gift. "You're so suspicious of everything, June," he'd say with a laugh that had an edge in it. "You think everyone's hiding something." I do, actually. It's my job. I just never imagined the everyone included him. We had a good life on paper. A house with a porch I loved. A lake place 2 hours out that he loved. 2 reliable cars. A daughter named Audrey, who is 19 now and away at school, and the best thing either of us ever made. I worked because I wanted to. He earned more, and he made sure in 100 small weather systems that I knew it. He'd hand me a credit card the way you'd hand a teenager an allowance. He'd ask over dinner, in front of his mother, what I'd done all day, with a little smile, like my 45 hours of catching career criminals was a charming hobby. People do love a hobby. His mother, Patricia, would smile into her wine. The red flags didn't wave. They whispered, the way the worst ones always do. About 14 months before the papers came, the whispers started. Small things. He got a new phone and set up a passcode he'd never had before. He started taking calls in the Jube garage. The business, which he'd always groaned about being tight on cash, suddenly wasn't paying for the trip to Charleston, but the lake place got a new dock. He filed our taxes himself that year, which he'd always had the accountant do. And when the joint return came for me to sign, he flipped to the last page and held out a pen and said, "The usual, babe." And for 1 second, 11 years old again, I almost flipped back to the front. I didn't. I signed. I want you to sit with that, because if you've ever ignored the thing your gut already knew, you're not stupid and you're not weak. You're just tired and you love someone. And reading the whole thing means admitting what's in it. I get it. I'm the one who's supposed to be immune, and I signed anyway. That's how good the comfortable lie is. But I kept the copy. That's the thing about a habit. Even when your heart overrides it, your hands keep doing their job. I scanned that return and filed it the way I file everything, and I forgot about it, and it sat in a folder waiting to save my life. The morning it happened, it was the day after our anniversary. We'd gone to dinner. He'd been warm, attentive, the old Greg, and I'd let myself feel hopeful, which I've since learned is its own kind of evidence, because a man is never kinder than the week before he detonates your life. He'd timed it. Of course he'd timed it. A process server in a polo shirt knocked at 8 in the morning while I was still in my robe, said, "Are you June Marsh?" and handed me an envelope and apologized, which I appreciated. Greg was already at the office. He'd left before 6. He'd left before 6 so he wouldn't have to watch. I opened it at the kitchen counter. Petition for divorce, and clip behind it, a proposed separation agreement, already drafted, already detailed, the way a thing is only detailed when it's been built for months. I read every page. Of course I read every page. And as I read, the analyst in me woke all the way up, because the agreement wasn't the document of a man who just decided to leave. It was the document of a man who'd been quietly rearranging the furniture for a year so that when the lights came on, everything valuable would already be on his side of the room. The numbers were wrong, not illegal on their face. Wrong the way a building is wrong, when a load-bearing wall has been moved and replastered so you can't see the seam. The agreement listed the marital assets, and the list was too small. The business was valued at almost nothing, which is a beautiful trick, valuing a thriving company at the price of its used trucks. There was a debt to his brother Dale I'd never heard of, $40,000, listed as a marital liability we'd split. The lake house was somehow in an LLC now. And the cash, we'd had real savings. The agreement showed accounts that had been bled down to almost nothing over the previous year. 1,000 here, 3,000 there, all in amounts small enough to look like life, and large enough added up to be a second mortgage. I sat at the counter for a long time. I did not cry, and I want to be honest about that, because people expect tears here, and I didn't have them yet. What I had was the strange, cold clarity I get at work when a case finally shows me its shape. I'd been gaslit gently, expertly, for a year, by a man who underestimated the one thing about me he should have feared most. So I did what I do. I made coffee, I opened a clean spreadsheet, and I went to find the wall they'd moved. If you've ever been handed a deal and told to just sign it, told you were lucky to get even that, told not to make this hard for everyone, that part is coming. And I need you to see exactly how a quiet woman takes a built lie apart, one row at a time. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because it gets worse before it gets very, very satisfying. Here's the thing most people don't understand about hidden money. You almost never find it by finding the money. You find it by finding the lie that's covering the money. And lies, unlike money, can't be moved offshore. They sit in the public record, in the joint returns, in the timing, in the things a person did exactly one beat too fast. I started with the tax return I'd scanned, the one I'd almost not read. And there it was, line by line, the first crack. The year before he filed for divorce, Our joint return had overpaid the IRS by a wildly large amount, set up for a refund that would arrive after the divorce was final. It's a classic. You overpay the government during the marriage, when the money is still marital, and you collect the fat refund when you're single, and your spouse never sees a dime of what was, on paper, half hers. I'd flagged that exact pattern for strangers a dozen times. He'd done it to me on a return I'd signed at his kitchen counter without reading the front. Then the brother, Dale, the $40,000 debt. I pulled our bank history, the joint accounts I still had every right to see, and I traced it. There was no loan from Dale. There had never been a loan from Dale. What there was, 8 months before the petition, was a payment of $40,000 from our joint account to Dale, labeled loan repayment, for a loan that did not exist, money parked with a brother to be quietly handed back the day after the ink dried. He'd turned our savings into a fake debt and then listed the fake debt as something I owed half of. He'd robbed me twice with the same $40,000 and made me the one who looked greedy for noticing. The LLC was the part that made me almost respect him, the way you respect a thing that's trying to kill you. The lake house, our lake house, had been quietly deeded into a limited liability company the previous spring. And here's what people forget, the thing the Pembrokes of the world and the Greg Marshes of the world always forget. LLC filings are public. Deeds are public. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need a subpoena. You just need to know which filing cabinet the county keeps in daylight. I searched the state's business registry, and there it was. An LLC formed 14 months earlier. Registered agent, a member list. And the member wasn't Greg. The member was Patricia Marsh, his mother. I sat back from my screen and felt the whole architecture of it click into place, cold and clean, the way a case does when the last number lands. This wasn't a man who'd panicked and grabbed what he could on his way out the door. This was a plan with more than one set of hands on it. His mother held the lake house. His brother held the cash. He held the story, and I was supposed to hold the bag. I want to tell you I felt rage, and I did, somewhere far down, but mostly, I felt the thing I feel when a case is good. I felt awake, because a lie with 3 people in it is 3 times as strong and 3 times as fragile. It only holds if everyone keeps quiet and nobody looks too hard. They'd built it on the certainty that I would never look hard at the people I loved. They were about to learn that I look hardest at exactly that. But I also knew, sitting there with my coffee going cold, what I had and what I didn't. I had a beautiful map of where the money went. What I did not yet have was the one thing that turns a suspicion into a club a court will swing. I needed it clean, sourced, and undeniable. And I needed someone with a license to make the banks and the business produce the records that weren't mine to demand. I'm an analyst. I read the trail. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a fool who confuses being right with being able to prove it. So I did the hardest thing I'd done in a year. I asked for help. Renata Cho ran a small family law practice across town, and she was recommended to me by a woman at work who'd survived her own quiet war. Renata's office had bad chairs and good light and a stillness to her that I trusted on sight, the stillness of someone who'd watched a lot of confident men learn they weren't as smart as they thought. I slid my spreadsheet across her desk, and she read it the way I'd read the tax return. Slow, with a pen, frowning at the same rows I'd frowned at. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me. "This isn't a divorce," she said. "This is a concealment." And then, carefully, the way honest professionals tell you the truth, she walked me through what that did and didn't mean. In North Carolina, like most states, both spouses have to make a full and honest financial disclosure under oath in a divorce. It isn't optional. You list everything. Hiding marital assets, dressing up fake debts, transferring property to a relative to keep it off the table. That's not hardball. That's fraud on the court. If we can document it, she said, and document it cleanly, the consequences are serious. A judge can reopen the whole settlement. He can award you more than half to make up for what was hidden. He can order Greg to pay your legal fees. In a bad enough case, he can hold him in contempt. I asked her if we'd win. She didn't blink, and that's how I knew she was honest. I can't promise you what a judge does, she said. Nobody who's telling you the truth can. It depends on the judge, on how clean the proof is, on how he comes across on the stand. But June, she said, and she tapped the spreadsheet. I have done this for 19 years, and I have rarely seen a trail this clear left by someone who thought no one would follow it. They built this assuming you couldn't read a balance sheet. The whole thing is balanced on you being stupid. She almost smiled. I take it you're not stupid. The threat started about a week later, because they always do, and they always tell you you're close. Greg came to find me himself, which told me how rattled they were getting. He showed up at the house on a Tuesday evening to get some things, and he found me at the kitchen table with my folders. And for about 30 seconds, he tried the old version of himself, the warm one. He sat down across from me and said we didn't need to make this ugly, that we were adults, that the agreement was fair, and his lawyer said it was generous, that I should think about Audrey and just sign so we could both move on. I let him talk. Then I watched the warmth go out of him, like a thermostat clicking off, because I wasn't melting. His voice dropped. You always do this, he said. You make everything into a case. You can't just trust anyone, can you? You're going to spend money you don't have on lawyers to fight a deal that's already fair, and you're going to lose, and you're going to look paranoid and bitter to everyone who knows us, and then you'll have to sign anyway, just poorer. He smiled when he said it. He thought that was subtle. I've sat across a table from men who moved millions through shell companies and never raised their voices. I don't scare at my own kitchen table. I told him I appreciated the advice. I told him I'd always been careful, that it was the whole job, and that the careful thing, when something's been buried, is to find out whether it was buried because it was nothing or because it was true. His jaw worked. He gathered his things too fast and left, and I sat there a minute in the quiet and understood I'd just been threatened by a man who'd had 20 years of practice making threats sound like concern. The difference this time was that I'd already seen the LLC. I knew which of us was bluffing. Then his mother called, Patricia, sweet as anything, the way she got when she wanted something. She wanted to clear the air. She wanted us all to sit down, like family, before the lawyers ruin everything, and have a nice dinner and talk it through. The four of us, her and Greg and Dale and me, and get everyone on the same page about the agreement. She used the word family the way some people use a crowbar. Don't make this into a war, June, she said. Greg's worked so hard for what he has. Don't punish him for it. Be reasonable. Just come to dinner. And I understood, holding the phone, exactly what dinner was. It was a stage. It was the wedding altar and the birthday party and 3 other stories you may have heard. It was the place they would surround me with the people I'd loved for 20 years and apply the oldest pressure in the world, the pressure of everyone is looking at you be good, and slide the pen across the table while I was too outnumbered and too tired to read the front. They'd built me an ambush and dressed it as a kindness. So I said yes. I'd love to come, I said. What can I bring? Because here's what I'd figured out, the thing that turned my stomach over from fear into something steadier. They wanted every person who mattered in one room. Greg, Patricia, Dale. The 3 sets of hands on the lie, all at the same table, all expecting a surrender. You cannot edit a story that the whole family watches. break at once. Patricia thought she was building the room where I'd sign. She was building the room where the truth would finally get to speak at a normal volume in front of every witness who'd otherwise hear Greg's version first. I called Renata that night. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I'll keep. A wall of paper looks like a vendetta, she said. 3 documents look like the truth. Bring 3. And June, she said, don't raise your voice. Let them be loud. The loud ones do your work for you. I had 10 days. I spent them being careful. I went to work and acted exactly normal. I texted Patrizia about the menu. I let Greg believe I was wobbling. Dropped a line and a call about how maybe he was right. Maybe fighting wasn't worth it. Watched the relief in his voice and felt nothing but the cold, clean focus of a case coming together. Renata, meanwhile, did the thing only a license can do. She sent the formal requests on letterhead that made the bank produce the records of Dale's account and the business produce its real books, so that nobody could later wave any of it off as a wife snooping. The deed, the LLC, the tax return, those I already had from daylight. The rest came back exactly as the trail had promised. $40,000 to Dale and not a page of any loan. A business valued in the agreement at the price of scrap. And a set of real books showing a company that cleared more in a quarter than they'd claimed it was worth. 3 days before the dinner, Renata called. We have it, she said. All of it. And then she said the part that mattered most. Greg signed his financial disclosure last week, under oath. It's already filed with the court. And on it, under penalty of perjury, he listed none of this. Not the LLC, not the real value of the business, not Dale. He swore to a court that the small picture was the whole picture. June, she said, the hiding was a divorce tactic. The sworn statement is the felony-shaped part. He put his own signature on the lie. I sat down slowly. He'd done the one thing I never have. He'd signed the front without reading what it would cost him. I'll be fair to Patricia for a moment, because the truth is stronger when it's fair. In those 10 days, I learned a little of where she came from, and it complicated my anger without softening it. Patricia had married Greg's father young, a girl from a hard place who'd been handed, at her own engagement, the clear understanding that the money was his, the house was his, the name was his, and she was a guest in all of it as long as she was useful and quiet. She'd spent 40 years as a woman who had no money of her own in her own name, and the Lake House LLC, I realized, was the first thing that had ever been hers. Hers on paper, hers in daylight, the deed to a thing she could finally say belonged to her. I felt one clean second of sorrow for the girl she'd been. And then I let it go, because the woman she'd become had a choice. She could have looked at me, another woman being quietly stripped of what was half hers, and seen herself. Instead, she chose to hold the getaway car. Pain explains people. It doesn't excuse them. The girl who'd owned nothing grew up to help her son make sure his wife owned nothing either. The dinner was at Patricia's, the good plates and the bad tension. The house glowed. There was a roast. Dale was there with his easy salesman's smile, refilling glasses, a man who had no idea the floor was about to open under him. Greg was warm, performing reasonableness for his mother, and I let him, and I complimented the food, and I waited, with a slim folder in my bag, and the strange calm I know from the worst days at work. The calm that comes when there's finally nothing left to do but the right thing. We got through dinner. Then Patricia set down her fork, smiled at me down the table, and opened the door herself. June, she said gently, we're so glad you came. We just want this to be peaceful. Greg has the agreement here, and his lawyer says it's more than fair, and we thought, no lawyers, no fighting. You could just look it over tonight, and we could put all this behind us. As family. She nodded at Greg, and Greg produced it, the agreement, and a pen, and slid them across the table toward me, and Dale topped off my wine, and 3 faces turned to me, warm and certain, waiting for the good girl to sign. I looked at the pen for a second. Then I reached into my bag. "I'm going to do this with you the way I did it with them," I said, and I set the first page down in the center of the table where the light caught it. I kept my voice level. I have always kept my voice level. "This is the deed to the lake house," I said. I had a copy pulled from the county. It's a public record. Anyone here can do the same tomorrow morning. It shows the house was moved into an LLC 14 months ago, right around when you filed, Greg. "And the LLC," I said, and I looked down the table. "The only member listed on it is you, Patricia." The room went still. Patricia's smile froze on her face like frost. I set down the second page. "This is $40,000, I said, "that left our joint account 8 months ago, labeled as a loan repayment to Dale." I let that sit. There was never a loan from Dale. I've got the records now, requested the right way, on letterhead. No note, no agreement, no loan. Just our savings, parked with a brother, to be handed back after the divorce. I looked at Dale, whose smile had drained to the color of the tablecloth. "It's in the agreement as a debt I owe half of," I said. "You took my money, called it a debt, and billed me for the privilege." Greg's chair scraped back an inch. "June," he said, in that warm managing register I'd heard for 20 years. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't trust anyone. You've turned a divorce into one of your cases. This is insane. Turn over the third page," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into a well. "This is your financial disclosure," I said. "The one you signed last week. Under oath, filed with the court." I held it up. Everything I just laid on this table, the LLC, the business's real value, the money with Dale. You swore, under penalty of perjury, that none of it existed. You didn't just hide it from me, Greg. You hid it from a judge, in writing, with your own signature. I set the page down beside the others, 3 documents, exactly 3, side by side in the candlelight. "I'm not the one who turned this into a case," I said quietly. "You did, the day you signed your name to a lie." Nobody moved. The roast cooled, and then it came apart the way it always does. Greg exploded first, on his feet, loud and fast, that I was a liar, that I'd snooped, that I'd never trusted him, that I'd hired some lawyer to attack a generous man over a few accounting choices, his voice climbing until it filled the small room. Dale wouldn't meet anyone's eyes and had gone very interested in the sideboard. And Patricia broke last and worst, the sweetness coming off her all at once, screaming that I was ungrateful, that Greg had worked himself to the bone, that I'd always thought I was so clever with my little bank job, that the house was hers, she had every right. I stayed in my chair. I let them be loud, because their noise was doing my work for me. When there was finally a breath in it, I spoke softly, so they had to go quiet to hear me. "Patricia," I said, "you told me on the phone not to make this a war. You said be reasonable. I let the silence hold. I'm being completely reasonable. I'm asking for half of what's real. The only people at this table who turned it into a war are the 3 who built an LLC, a fake loan, and a sworn lie to make sure half of real was 0. I closed my folder. "Renata will be in touch with Greg's attorney about reopening the disclosure," I said, and I stood up. I'd never planned to throw the pen, or shout, or cry in that house. I gathered my 3 pages, and for the first time in 20 years, I walked out of a Marsh family dinner with my head perfectly level, and behind me, the whole beautiful machine sat frozen, and the only people still making noise in that dining room were the ones who'd built the lie. People imagine justice as a courtroom thunderclap. Mostly, it's slower than that, and it comes on paper, the way real things come. The real consequences arrived over the weeks after. Renata took my 3 pages and Greg's sworn disclosure to a judge, and a judge does not look kindly on a man who lies to him in writing. The settlement was reopened. The Lake House LLC came apart under daylight. You cannot use your mother as a coat closet for marital property and expect it to hold. The business got a real valuation by a real appraiser, and the number was not the price of used trucks. The $40,000 came back from Dale's account, every dollar, because there is nothing to argue when there was never a loan. And the court, having seen a man swear falsely under oath, ordered Greg to pay a meaningful share of my legal fees, which is the court's quiet way of saying it noticed exactly what he'd done. It didn't happen in that dining room. It happened over months, in offices, on letterhead, in the slow, grinding daylight that no LLC can seal. There was a girlfriend, it turned out, which surprised no one, least of all me, since a man doesn't plan an exit that carefully for nobody. She is welcome to him. Patricia stopped speaking to me, which I survived. Dale sent a single text months later, an apology of sorts, the kind a man sends when the consequences have reached his own door. I didn't answer it. Greg, in the end, kept his business, smaller than he wanted, and his pride, smaller than that, and he learned the most expensive lesson of his life, which is that the cheapest thing in any room is a person who's sure no one else will read the whole thing. My daughter Audrey called me after, when she'd heard the shape of it. She didn't ask whose side to be on. She asked one question. "Mom," she said, "why didn't you ever fight him about the money before?" And I told her the truth, which is the only thing I have to give her. Because I loved him, I said, and loving someone made me put down the one tool that would have shown me who he was. Don't ever do that, baby. You can love a person all the way and still read the whole thing before you sign. The two aren't enemies. I spent 20 years thinking they were. I have a folder now, at home, in my own filing cabinet, in my own name. It has the deed and the disclosure, and the trail, 3 pages that took an entire built lie apart at a dinner table. I don't keep them to stay angry. I keep them to stay clear, because protecting what is yours is not greed, and it is not bitterness, and it is not a betrayal of the family that betrayed you first. It's the rent you pay to finally live in peace. So if someone has ever made you feel small with money, if someone has ever patted the air and told you not to worry your pretty head, if someone is sliding a pen across the table right now and telling you to just sign, to be reasonable, to not make this hard for everyone, I need you to hear this. Read the whole thing, read the front. The careful ones are not the paranoid ones. The careful ones are the ones still standing when the noise stops. That's my story. One return I almost didn't read, one deed in daylight, one signature on a lie, and one quiet woman who turned 3 pages over at the right table. If this reminded you that silence is a choice and so is the truth, make the braver choice today. And if you know a woman who needs to hear it, send her this. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.